Welcome to Zeifmans Presents Masters of Disruption, Dialogues with Emerging Industry Entrepreneurs. Join our host, Zeifman's partner, Larry Zeifman, for this week's episode on cannabis.
Okay, my name is Larry Zeifman. I'm a partner at Zeifman's mid-size accounting firm, and welcome to our podcast series, Masters of Disruption, where we're talking to leaders, CEOs in the emerging industries. And today we're talking to players in the cannabis space. And we're going to talk to Brad Moore and to Victor Mancebo, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. Let's start with Brad.
Hi, Brad Moore, CEO, Global Cannabis Applications Corp. GCAC, as we're commonly referred to, is, we like to say we're a blockchain company with a cannabis problem. Our whole focus is on better outcomes for medical cannabis patients using advanced technologies, including blockchain, machine learning, algorithms, artificial intelligence, and mobile technologies.
Sounds good. And Victor Mancebo.
Yeah, thank you for having me here, Larry. So Victor Mancebo, CEO of TheraTrue Inc., Georgia applicant and Georgia license winner in the cannabis sector. Also applied in the state of Virginia, waiting for that outcome. And also I sit on the board of Vireo as well, and sit on other boards for international companies in the cannabis sector as well.
Okay. Tell us a little bit, Victor, we'll start with you, on what interested you in the cannabis space in the first place.
Yeah, the cannabis sector was definitely growing. The first time that I heard about, believe it or not, it was in 2017 when I started seeing some of the state legalization of it. And I was a little bit, I've been mostly my entire career in just operations and just more traditional businesses and industries. And in 2017, I had an opportunity to jump in, and I was reluctant to it, not because of anything wrong with it by any means. I just didn't know where it was going to head, right? I didn't know, I don't think mostly everyone, we didn't know where the industry was going to go, more specifically from a regulatory perspective, not economic perspective. And then in 2018, I did receive another opportunity to join the cannabis sector, and I was really intrigued. Everything that I've done in my past history on a professional side has been mostly just traditional standard industries. And this brought something new to me. And this was extremely intriguing. And I think the folks that join the cannabis industry that are doing things right will stay long and will be pioneers in this industry. That kind of called my name to it.
Brad, for you?
Yeah, well, similar. So I had investments in cannabis in Canada. I had done well on most of them, right? Because back that in the day, as long as you had a license and an idea, you had a $10 million valuation. So it was pretty good. But, there was something just unique there, and where it was in the argument that, people saying medical and medicinal, using a lot of words. And this was in the period in Canada where we had the gray market. So you had the Red Cross sign and green neon glowing out in front of a dispensary, and you walk in, and somebody would tell you what you should take. And hopefully, like I said, you wouldn't fall down on the floor and have a seizure from it, right? And so it was a very kind of voodoo-ish type of approach. And so I just recognized that I thought there was something better there, right? Our quest and our vision is that there is a better way to do it, and that big data is the answer for it. So that's where we started, where I started, and where we've gotten to in this so far.
And Brad, how do you feel how do you think that data will impact the cannabis industry?
Data is the answer in all things. It's I think probably that Victor will agree, it's not a super sexy thing. It's not super sellable, but it's the gas in the engine of all things, right? Look, cannabis is a plant. That means every plant is unique. And so like a human being, so every time you generate one, you're looking at the potentiality of a different outcome, especially when you get into the arguments. We can talk about the entourage effect and what that means and what it doesn't mean. But now you're matching two unique things, a human being and a plant. And so I think it's critical path that we do the clinical studies, and we need more of those. We have a better understanding of the chemical compounds, but most importantly, repeatability and predictability in manufacturing. There's been great conversations. I can't remember who said it. I thought it was the CEO of the Canopy finance arm said, look, in a lot of cases, there's stricter controls on growing tobacco than there is in cannabis. And I think some of the challenges around that, unless you're growing to a standard that, and you understand and you have targets on that, and you measure before and after, and even when even if you warehouse something, humidity can change the plan. And so once the times it hits a consumer and they ingest it in their body, what you think you're ingesting for what purpose might be a totally different experience. So we need to record and measure all that. We believe that testing through on the blockchain does a couple of things. A, if you're doing it right, put your cards on the table, let people know. And B, you as a cultivator should benefit from that by the consumer then feeding you back data on that, right? So you can look at your manufacturing, you can look at your marketing materials, and you can understand. And when you get a winner, you can understand why it's winning. I think one of the key things that we all got to do is we got to think about, it's not about the 1% or 1% of people using it. It's about the 2% of the 1%. And a large percentage that's going to come from doctors getting comfortable with it, understanding, having a reference point, and then regulators having something to write meaningful regulations around versus regulations that are designed either like I give up, my Irish grandmother saying whiskey's good for knee joint. Well, it's not, maybe,
For our listeners, maybe Brad, you can explain for those who aren't familiar with your reference to the blockchain really as an information piece as opposed to a financial piece. Do you want to speak to that for a minute?
So where did blockchain come from? Blockchain came from the ability to create a transaction between two parties, right? And you needed a secure public ledger. So really a public ledger is just a fancy way of saying a database that people have access to. So what blockchain allows you to do is work backwards from the experience. You get as close to the formulation all the way through to the growing process. At the end of the day, you still have a variable plant coming out of the ground. And there's a lot of things in there. And look, in Israel, they put terpenes, they do other things to try to stabilize. I don't know if that's the answer. I'm not saying the answer, but when you only know what a certain percentage of the molecules do in the body, but you do know what all the molecules, so you know how they affect the ones that are affecting the body, you can then put those in a frame. And if you can bracket that, you then put yourself into a much better space in terms of creating reliability of output. When you get the feedback on that gram consumed, you then have the ability to say, okay, where are we winning and where are we losing? Was there a change? Is there consistency in our manufacturing process? See, I'm sure Victor would agree. This is a manufacturing issue. That's one of the biggest problems we have.
And I want to turn to Victor because as an experienced CEO in the medical cannabis space, how receptive do you think the industry is or will be to this type of transparency?
It's going to be a tough sale, right? So, I mean, and I can tell you, it depends, right? And what Brad said, it depends on the company and the culture that they're trying to portray, right? So I pride ourselves when we were operating in Florida and even with Vireo and other states, that how transparent we are with our patients, and not only with the patients, but also with the regulators. And I think a technology that Brad is offering, I think it's something great that, the regulators should look at for sure, as opposed to being widely open and just saying, hey, we're going to use metric on this side, we're going to use BioTrack on this side, and then just leaving the ERP kind of open to, and the seed to sale software, I guess, predictability just to the operators. And I think if you change that and you regulate the software itself, I think you can get us to a point that we should be. I 100% agree. A lot of folks, a certificate of analysis, or it goes by the COA. I've heard horror stories, and I've seen it myself in other states, not in Florida, but even in states, right? In the state of Florida and Canada as well, that they manipulate the COAs, right? They change the THC level. They'll change the cannabinoid count. They'll change the terpenes. They'll change it from from fail to pass, just so they can get product off the shelves. And, we have a huge responsibility as manufacturers, as Brad mentioned. I take it seriously. If you have a patient that has some kind of cancer, lung cancer, and that patient is inhaling a product that you changed or modified to get passed, and it, for example, goes out with mold, you have yourself a big problem. And that's why I think, some kind of a control is definitely important. Do I think it's going to be easy? No, it's not going to be that easy, but it's something that I'm definitely advocate for sure. So I agree with Brad 100%.
Thanks. Let's go in a different direction because I think we could stay on this topic for a while, but let's go in a different direction. And let's, Brad, speak to us a little bit about your global expansion. Israel, Lithuania, a number of very interesting markets. How did you go about that, and what did you find working in the cannabis space in some of those locations?
So I first got introduced to the construct around what blockchain was, and I had somebody explain it to me for 4 months every day, and then the light switch went on finally. Because I'm a Kodak marketing guy with an MBA, so I'm not nearly as smart as I think I am. But I was like, oh my God, and then they were like, this is really gotta go there. Now you get it. And I was like, yeah, I got it, right? But it's interesting because what I saw in Israel.
I'm desperately waiting for that aha moment. Okay, Brad. So
yeah. Well, it's one of these things you got to sit back and you got to view it. You have to understand how it started and where it came from and the reason why. It's always about the reason why. Blockchain as part of crypto was meant there to say, we don't need you banks, which has threw all regulators in the world upside down, made them very upset because their whole purpose was to regulate banks. It wasn't to regulate you, it was to regulate banks. So now you bring it into cannabis. And so what is the problem? And Victor nailed it. It's a lack of meaningful regulation.
So Victor, tell us how you feel after we've heard from Brad. How do you feel? We asked you before how you feel the players in the industry will respond to this request for transparency. What about the regulators and the customers, the other two sides of this? How do you think they'll react to this this suggestion of transparency?
I do agree, right? I do agree that there should be some regulation that kind of regulates the software that's going to be out there. I think that's missing. And, I could say from my experience, and I won't name any state specifically, but I think there's a lot of political push to that, right? There's the more we are vague on the programs that go out, probably the better it is for that specific state. There is some economics behind that. There's some lobbying behind that, and but I do agree with Brad. I think markets that changed and that flipped over from medical to adult use, I think that ship sailed. There's not much. It's a product, right? You're going to be sold a specific product and whatever it is. But I think on the medical side, which is kind of anything east of the Mississippi River, at least for the United States, it's kind of what makes sense. All these new markets that are coming into the medical, that are implementing a medical program, there is a huge opportunity there. I think those regulators are receptive to it. And I've seen kind of a wave with regulators that what's happening now as they're turning on these states, they're kind of copying the best of each state. If you look at Florida, Georgia's very similar program. I can see Alabama kind of adopting the same. Mississippi, I know that they had some issues and that maybe that's going to be next year. I heard North Carolina's coming on. So most of these states have some similarities and they're getting smarter and smarter. One of the biggest thing that was a big problem was the social equity piece, right? A lot of folks on the social equity side, a lot of states that started the like Colorado, Oregon, California didn't really have a big social equity program. And obviously there's a lot of things that happen culturally wise within the last 2 years. And they've pushed emphasis on social equity. So now you're seeing more of these states saying, hey, we do need social equity now. Like it's a must. And there's extra points for it, by the way. Here you go. And I think it's going to happen the same with the data. And I agree with Brad, right? I don't think we have enough we don't have enough data. And the cool thing that attracted me to this market was that, right? That there wasn't a lot of stuff. We're the ones that are supposed to implement it. But if we're not allowed to, how do we move forward, right? And that's the part. But I think data is key. I think it's important to capture all the data, especially from consumers. And having the consumer feedback is key. I think we're getting there, but I think we're taking really small steps. And everyone's just focusing on the green rush and let's make some money. But we have to be focusing on the data. And I think that's going to be the next step. And I honestly think the smart MSOs and non-MSOs, public or private, they need to be paying attention to this because in 3 to 4 years, if US goes into federal, legal, then you need to be ready for the big monster, which is the FDA, right? You need to be ready for that piece. And if you're not FDA ready and you're manufacturing, you better watch out. It's going to be a lot of CapEx and a lot of revoked licenses.
I think this has been a terrific conversation. I think I would label this conversation Cannabis 3.0. We've been through Cannabis 1.0, of course, and 2.0, right? This is 3.0, the next stage, especially in the medical cannabis space. So on that note, I want to ask if either of you have any closing thoughts. You want to go first, Brad?
I'll refer back to a court case that happened in Ontario where the Supreme Court of Ontario made Manulife, I believe, pay for somebody's prescription. Now, that's an interesting argument. In Canada, we have a single payer. In the United States, you have a multi-payer system. If you're an HMO, how can you get in behind, like getting in, writing paying for a prescription on something you don't even know what it does? And there's going to be a lot of shift around, I think, in this kind of, it's like this moving tide goes in. In Canada right now, we all know what happens is you get like $500 a year for your gym license. So now if you drop the weight on your head at the gym, it's the same thing as if you take too much cannabis and you do the chicken. But, it's interesting because let's say I do this and I take something and I have an adverse reaction, like, the cancer patient, who's going to pay for that person's disability? So, we have to look at the economics of a lot of angles. Now, I'm not an American. I don't understand necessarily that whole contract, but I do know that if there's enough big data, meaningful, not just regulations, but policy can be written. And once you get better policy, then you start to drive adaptation. So at the core of it, once again, that unsexy data thing sits there. And I think that's the opportunity. I think a guy like Victor understands more than anybody. It's really a matter of like understanding the framework, the lay of the how the economics of a region works, right? And all those states that he talked about, those are I'll tell you this, those are at the front of Brad Moore's mind, because I do think forget the let's go get stoned states. It's just not for us, right? I want to help out the people who went through what I went through. So leave it at that. Thank you,
Victor.
That's awesome, Brad. Yeah. So listen, there's as you mentioned, Larry, it's 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, right? We can go through this for a while. And again, there's a lot of upsides, right? I think the industry is growing rapidly, and that's what makes it really attractive. There's direct opportunities and indirect opportunities to be in the industry. And I think, there's just areas of improvement that we need to work on, and not only from a leadership perspective, but also from political side. And we're missing data. Data is going to help us to consolidate some of that information and just say, just from a drafting of a policy or rules and regulations, and also from operation perspective. And all in all of that, it really helps the business, but in reality, it's not only helping the business, it's also helping the consumer and the patients that really need the medicine. So I hope we get there, and I think we will. I'm optimistic about it. And I think if we have folks like Brad and myself just pushing along, we'll get there. So that's my closing statement.
Thank you, Victor. And thank you, Brad. Thank you for being with us today. I think this was a great conversation. And thank you to our listeners. Thank you for joining us today on Masters of Disruption.
You've been listening to Masters of Disruption. Join us for next week's episode on blockchain and cryptocurrency, where we sit down with guests Jonathan Hoyle, CEO and Director of Perk Labs, and Jonathan Wiesblatt, Co-founder, Director, and Officer of Liquid Meta. If you have questions or want to learn more, contact us direct at info@zeifmans.ca.